Hi guys, Jackie from Famish Farm, and we are back this week with a recipe that I'm titling Mom's Favorite Cream Chicken. Now, cream chicken is one of those recipes that my mom and dad loved, and they weren't alone because at our county fair, the Boone County Fair in Belvidere, Illinois, they were members of a Grange. Every year, one day, the Grange sponsored food booth would specialize in something. It was grilled pork chops one day, it was grilled chicken quarters another day, and one of the days that was their favorite was the cream chicken. The recipes that I've found are for large quantities. I'm just guessing that at one point each of the families must have made a huge batch of this cream chicken and brought it to the fairgrounds, where it was served up throughout the day until it ran out. These meals, they always ran out. They ran out of chicken, they ran out of pork, whatever. You tried to get it around lunchtime because if you were going to wait for dinner, it might not be there. I am going to recreate this recipe in a version that would be appropriate for either a large family or just to have it in a crock pot on game day or something like that. And basically, I'm cutting back on the chicken. I'm doing 2 chickens here, and this was an incredibly huge amount of meat. One of my stainless steel mixing bowls full when this was deboned. My recipe that I'll post on the website is going to be a 1 chicken in the pot kind of recipe. Here you'll see the chicken is kind of sticking out of the top of the pot. Guys, I have basically taken the organs out, the gizzards and all that. I've taken off as much skin as I can, and now we're going to poach this in water. And I did lightly salt and pepper the water, and you guys can do the same. This is going to be made the day before we're going to serve the cream chicken. And the reason why is you want this broth to cool down so that you can skim the fat off. And you also want the chicken to cool down so you can debone it. If you're going to try to do this in one day, cook the chicken and stuff in the morning, let it cool in the afternoon, and then assemble in the evening. For me, it just works to go ahead and cook this the day before. And I'm kind of relearning some of the skills that it took to master this dish because I have forgotten. One of the components in cream chicken is that you can either eat this over biscuits, over noodles. I even saw one of her recipes had you split English muffins. It's very versatile. You can also thin it out if you put noodles in it and just have it for soup for lunch one day, which we have done a couple times now. It's just a very versatile, delicious recipe. Here we're going to start with our chicken. This took, and I wasn't watching it closely or anything. Every time I came in the kitchen, I rotated the chicken breast so the top that's kind of sticking out here got down to the bottom, so everything got cooked thoroughly, but it took about 2 hours. Then you want to take your chicken out. You're going to set that on a plate or a platter, and beware that if you've cooked it for 2 hours, it's going to be fall apart tender. I was just lucky to get these out whole without them falling apart. And now I am skimming off these are like protein deposits. I call it scum. It won't hurt you. It will just make your broth look cleaner without it. So I skim that off. And this is really too hot to go into the fridge like this, just as the chickens are. So I've got these sitting in the kitchen where I'll let them cool off for, at least an hour before they go into the fridge. And I will pull out the chicken later tonight and go ahead and shred that off the bone. And the broth just stays in the fridge until the following morning when I come and skim the fat off. Day 2, we're going to start out by making our homemade noodles, and this is a recipe that my grandma Cummings taught me. I was probably middle school age, remember standing in her kitchen, and we did this right on her kitchen table, and you pour out 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Make a little well in the middle of the flour. The recipe we originally make calls for 2 teaspoons of salt, and I'm gonna just make this with a teaspoon of salt. You guys probably will want to use 2. Then you're gonna crack 2 eggs in the middle of the well that you've made. And here's where my memory goes fuzzy. I can't remember how much water to add. I was thinking it was 2 tablespoons, and then I thought, oh, maybe it's a half a cup. So I'm just going to start out by scrambling these eggs in this well of flour, and then slowly starting to draw the flour from the edges into this mixture, just to kind of judge how much water I think it's going to need. And then I'll slowly incorporate tablespoon by tablespoon until I can judge it better. Here's where I decide, well, let's try to knead this into a dough. I wish I'd taken my rings off. I forgot to do that. You guys do that kind of stuff too? Get going, and then you're like, ugh, wish I had taken those off. So we're just going to go straight to our hands. Once I have the full recipe, you guys could, if you have a bread machine with a dough cycle on it, you could easily do this in your bread machine, but it's just really easy and very satisfying to do this by hand. I don't mind kneading. In fact, it's kind of one of life's little meditation type times. You can just, you and the dough, you're turning something that's just a couple of little ingredients into something wonderful. Now, I'm going to save you some time. Add 5 tablespoons of water at the point where you start mixing the eggs, scrambling the eggs, and you will have about the perfect amount of water. If you add 6 tablespoons, it'll be just fine. It may be a little easier to knead it all together, but I end up adding 5 tablespoons of water to this dough. It does take me probably several minutes longer to make this because it's just a little harder to knead in all of the little dry bits of flour that I'm going to end up. Yes, I incorporate all 2 cups of this flour into the final dough. With the proper amount of water up front, it will not take that long. But even so, 10 minutes to me, this is heaven. This is just being able to create this wonderful noodle that my grandma taught me how to do like 5 decades ago. It boggles my mind. And I'm doing this so my sister has expressed interest in knowing how to do this, and hopefully my nieces and nephews will be able to do this too. My grandma Cummings was really an unusual person for her day and age. I was born in 1962, and at that time, my grandma was a kindergarten through 8th grade country school principal. Many of my friends that we went to church with had my grandma as both a principal and a teacher. So that was kind of cool. Just being able to make something that she taught me how to do is neat. You know, to feed your family is something that, yes, you can very easily buy perfectly good noodles in the store. But with just basically flour, salt, water, and eggs, you can make your own that are just incredibly delicious. This is going to be a fun couple of minutes, and it did take 10 minutes from the time I put my hands in the flour until I have a beautiful ball of dough. It's worth every second. Now guys, I'm going to speed through the rest of this kneading time so we can cut right to the chase. So here's that beautiful ball of dough, and as I start to roll this out, you're going to see that it springs back very quickly after having been worked. And this is the point where you'll want to just step away for 10 minutes or so and let the dough rest. And you'll see me do that here in just a second. Now, this dough is not sticky in the least, but you will want to add a little bit of flour to your work surface, whether that is stone, countertop, whatever you're going to be rolling this out on. And that'll just make getting these noodles up and getting them cut that much easier. So I'm going to play around with this ball of dough here for just a minute, and then I'm going to pick it up and get it floured. Now, once I let this rest the initial 10 minutes, and it may have been 30 minutes, it doesn't really matter, because what you're going to do is just start rolling this out. And it did take about 30 minutes once I did that initial resting period. Every time that I started to roll it out, if things started bouncing back, if that dough was too elastic, just stop, set your timer for 10 minutes and come back. I did that 3 times and it was perfect then to roll it out. And that's the point that we'll join here. So this is the part of the day where, again, I can't quite remember how thick these were rolled out. I can remember eating homemade noodles sometimes, and my mom would say, oh, I wish I'd made those thinner. It's just one of those things. There's probably no one right answer to this. Start out, aim for about 1/8 of an inch thick, and then go a little thinner. And then you're probably going to be just about right. And you can see I have floured my work surface good, so nothing's going to stick. And if I do kind of feel it binding on the mat, I will fold it over and add some more flour. And that's what you'll see me doing here. I'm getting the nice fresh surface on top, and just keep rolling until you get as thin as you can get. And just by feel, you can tell where the dough is a little bit thicker. And with a piece of dough this big, you'll have pockets where the dough is just obviously thicker. You're gonna wanna make it as thin and uniform as you can. And the reason why is that just helps the noodle cook uniformly. So you don't have the real thin noodles end up being real mushy, and the thicker noodles just taste too dense. So it's going to take several minutes, and I'll tell you here in the next little cut how long that actually took me to roll this out. I'm no expert, but this did take about 4 minutes to roll it out to the point where it was under 1/8 of an inch thick. Just so you know, if you're better with rolling pin, this is going to take you less time. If you make noodles on your own all the time, it'll take less time. Our next step is going to be to roll these up jelly roll style before we cut them. And to make this work without sticking, you're going to liberally flour both sides of the dough. So I floured the top, and now I'm going to stretch over the dough, and you'll just want to spread it out and just make sure that all of the surfaces have a nice coating of flour. And then you'll put that section back, fold over the next part, and flour this, and then just kind of spread it out. It's kind of like putting talcum powder on a baby's butt. And then you're just going to start, once you get this put back in place, you'll begin rolling from the longest edge. It doesn't really matter. You could roll it from the short edge if that's easier for you. And you'll just simply, doesn't matter how loose, how tight, just roll that over till you meet up with the other side. Now, this rolling style does a couple things. It makes sure that your noodles are all uniform in width, more so than using a knife or even a pizza cutter to cut the long strips of dough, unless you just have really incredible control. I don't have that, so this method works so slick. And it's also kind of fun if you want to involve your kids. When these little noodles are sliced, you need to unfurl these little pinwheels, and that's kind of fun for kids to help with that part. Now, if you're experimenting, let's say you have a KitchenAid with the pasta attachment, I'm sure this could all be done easily with your pasta attachment. Play around with it. This is a good base noodle recipe for an egg noodle. If I had a pasta attachment, I'd be playing with that too, believe me. Now, the next part of this step is going to be figuring out how long you want these noodles to be. You could keep them as long as they are. I'm going to choose to cut them into more bite-sized type pieces. Depending on your application, do whatever you like. For me, the total length was going to be about 2 inches is what I've decided will be about right. And you may do longer or shorter, just whatever you like. Okay, so let's speed through this. You guys get the gist of preparing these noodles and cutting them to whatever size you prefer. Once you've got everything cut out, the next step is just simply putting a light layer of flour over the top of them, then stirring them, fluffing them up again. And that flour does a couple things. It helps them dry out, and it also will help thicken your broth. I don't have a measurement on that. You're just going to take a tablespoon or two, fluff them, and then you can dry these on your counter overnight easily. I'm going to end up, while we're doing this, I've got my pot of broth on the stovetop ready to cook these noodles. I'm going to go from cutting them, flouring them, to cooking them in the space of, say, a half an hour. How long you dry these out doesn't really make any difference. So just as your schedule allows, you guys figure that out. So over on the stovetop, I have my 20-quart stock pot filled with that broth. And now, guys, this is a lot of broth. Remember, I made this for 2 chickens, so you're going to have half this broth amount, and you want to heat this till it's boiling. Apparently, the Grange's secret ingredient, a can of cream of chicken soup. This is a family size can. For the recipe I'm going to give you, you'll just use a regular size can. And you're going to empty that into a bowl. And then let's walk back over to our stovetop and fill this can up with our warming up broth. I was a little confused by this part of the recipe, but I guess this is maybe a way to extend the broth and make this feed more people. Not quite sure, but guys, you're just gonna mix this up, and then let's just set that to the side. And we're gonna head back over to our stovetop where we've got a second surprise ingredient, even more broth. This is just a big container. I think it's 48 ounces. Her recipe also at one point called for 2 large cans of Swanson chicken broth. I don't even know if they make that anymore. But so we're just empty this broth into our warming up, bubbling up, boiling up broth. Since it's only going to take a few minutes to cook the noodles, we're going to go ahead and put this broth, this cream of chicken soup mixture, if you will, into the crock pot, and we'll put that on high. And then as soon as the noodles come out of the boiling chicken broth, we'll add those to the crock pot. Here's our noodles going in, and we'll give those a stir. And remember, this is only going to cook for 3 or 4 minutes, so you'd rather have it undercooked because you're still going to have this sitting in hot broth waiting to be served to your family. Now, I just don't have a good plan for how I'm going to get the cooked noodles out of all of this broth. So the first part of the plan is let's just pour off some of the broth, but that fills up that stainless steel mixing bowl in just a moment. Now, here's where the fun begins. See the little tip on my metal sieve? Unfortunately, that's going to prevent me from getting all of these noodles quickly. So this is going to take forever. Let's speed this up. I've put the noodles and the chicken soup mix back on the crock pot and given them a stir. And now here's my big mixing bowl full of chicken. And this is where I figure out there is no way that all of this is going to fit into my 6-quart slow cooker. I wish I had a roasting pan. That's the only way I could have imagined this working. So I'm going to put half of this deboned shredded chicken into the diluted cream of chicken soup mixture that I just added the noodles to. And then I'll give it a stir and we'll let that sit. Put your lid back on and let this sit on high for as long as you need it to. And now I'm going to pull my blender out, and this recipe is thickened with flour and water. I've got 1.5 cups of water in my blender, and I'm going to recommend you just do 1/3 of that. So you'll do 1/2 cup of water and blend it with a half a cup of flour. For some reason, I'm having trouble remembering how to attach my blender bowl there. But here's our half a cup of flour going in, or 1.5 cups of flour in my case. And then you'll want to blend this until it's smooth. And then we'll move back over to the stove top where our liquid is still boiling. You'll empty the contents of the blender into your boiling stock, and you'll want to scrape that blender out and get all of the flour water mixed out of there. And then you're going to be stirring this. I stood here and stirred for several minutes. I don't know that it's necessary to be as attentive as I was, but it doesn't hurt. As I'm stirring this broth, I noticed some of the protein, the scummy protein, is still in this broth, and that's bothering me. And too, there's some noodles in there. And the noodles wouldn't have mattered. They don't hurt any. Actually, none of it hurts anything. I just wanted a clear looking broth to go into our noodles. So I end up stick blending this for a few minutes, actually probably a few seconds, just to smooth out everything out. And this is an excellent time to test the broth to see what you might need to add. Salt and pepper are the only things that the recipe mentions, but I did go ahead and pull a current recipe from All Recipes. That one suggested adding some garlic powder. I think that would be an awesome suggestion. They also added green peas to the mixture. I just am keeping this more traditional, like I remember it, so I'm not going to add any peas or any other vegetables to it. If you're trying to make this a one-pot dinner, go for it. That sounds like it'd be pretty and it'd be delicious. That particular recipe also called for topping the cream chicken with a cup of toasted sliced almonds, and that sounds super good. One more taste test, and we'll add a little bit more seasoning, and then it's time to divvy this up into workable quantities. So what I'm going to end up having is my freezer full of 2 of these spare chicken gravy, which is basically just thickened chicken broth. And then the rest of that gravy chicken broth will go into the crock pot. So I have pre-made 2 more dinners, huge dinners, that will be a full dinner plus plus plus. This ends up being this crock pot full of chicken noodles, cream of chicken soup, and now what's coming, the thickened chicken broth, is the equivalent of 5 dinners for Rod and I. And that is supplementing, well, actually, not always supplementing. We did use this for lunch for several days and just thinned it out a bit with some more chicken stock because it does get a little thicker when it sits. And then I've got the freezer full of this finished chicken, cream of chicken, ready to go whenever I need it. Plus, those 2 pans that are cooling in the sink full of thickened chicken broth, those are going to be ready for either more of this, or I could use that certainly for some other chicken stew coming up this winter. My husband's a bread guy, so I know he's going to really love this cream chicken over biscuits. So I'm going to try a new biscuit recipe. We're going to melt this butter in the microwave, and then we're just going to set it to the side while we prepare the actual biscuit. These are very accurately named butter swim biscuits. We're going to start out with 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder. Mine's kind of lumpy, so I'm going to put it through the metal sieve here in a minute, and 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. I have Himalayan salt. I'm just going to use 1 teaspoon. And here I'll get the lumps out of that baking powder. I'm almost to the bottom of that tin. And 1 tablespoon of sugar. Now that's an optional ingredient. First time I'm making the recipe, so I'm going to go ahead and add it to the recipe. And then we're going to use our whisk and just whisk up those dry ingredients. Then you'll need 2 cups of buttermilk. I want to say this might be a lower fat buttermilk. Either's fine. This works just fine. And the buttermilk's heavy and sticky, so get in there with a rubber scraper. And then I start out with my whisk to begin mixing this. You may just want to go straight to a spoon. but be sure to read the recipe here. You're going to stir this until it's mostly combined. So it's going to be kind of lumpy. You're not going for a smooth batter here. So you want to be very careful not to overwork the batter. That's kind of a key when you're making biscuits. So I will just switch to a spoon here, and then basically what I'm going to try to do is just get the rest of that flour moistened, and then I'm going to stop. Now the recipe calls for preheating your oven to 450, which I've already done, and they want you to use an 8x8 baking dish. And guys, this is my favorite little ceramic casserole dish here. That's my actually the only 8x8 pan I have. It's just the one I usually go for. I'm not exactly sure what the size of this is, so I'll show you how I'm gonna work around that. Here we're just gonna plop this dough right on top of this melted butter, and then we're gonna use the spatula, or it says you can even use your hands. You'll want to wet your hands if you're going to do it that way. And you just want to spread the dough out as evenly as you can out to the edges of the pan. The dough is gonna want to kind of spring back as you're working on it. It's all that butter. There's no reason for it to stick to the pan with that much butter in it. And it's going to be perfectly fine if you kind of weight it down and let some of that butter get up on top of these biscuits. That'll work out just fine. By the way, guys, I found this on one of my favorite websites and YouTube channels, Cog Hill Farm and Mrs. Cog Hill Farm. Brooke made this recipe for dinner not too long ago, and I knew I had to try it. It just looks super easy, and I'm sure it's going to be delicious. So I grab a cookie sheet out of the cupboard, and that's what I'm going to put underneath this just to be safe, and I'm really glad I did. Oh, and I did forget something. I'm going to pull this back out of the oven because it instructs you to cut the unbaked dough into 9 squares and then bake for 28 minutes or until the tops are golden brown. Now into the oven. And I will tell you too that it says to have a piece of foil ready. If they start to brown quickly, you can put the foil on top. So I did grab out a sheet just in case. And here's the biscuits out of the oven. You can't really see from that picture, but the butter did bubble out of the pan. So I'm definitely glad I did that. If you let it sit in the butter, it will absorb the butter. So that's what they suggest doing. Allow that butter to be absorbed before serving. And here's our crock pot full of Mom's favorite cream chicken. This is really good. Definitely make a small recipe. I'll probably put both recipes on the website and in the description just so you've got them. But it's probably way too much for most people, for most needs. So very good though. Let's face it, it's probably things that you've got in your house, very simple ingredients to make a really delicious wintertime cream chicken with biscuits or just cream chicken and noodles. Homemade noodles. Grandma